welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I am ranking the colors in the Commander format. It's a video I've been thinking about doing for quite a while. It's a really difficult subject to tackle, and obviously it's a bit of a controversial one. This is my month for controversial videos, I've decided, and everyone's going to have their opinions on the matter. I mean, I'll just say, guys, everything in Magic is subjective. Everything. I get people upset with me in the comments about stuff, and I mean, it's just my opinion, right? Everything about Magic is opinion. What's the best card in the history of Magic? Black Lotus, maybe? I mean, some people would say that, and some people would say otherwise, right? There is no definitive metric for which to gauge how good a card is in a particular format or how good it is overall. It is mostly just opinion at the end of the day, and that's what this video is going to be for the most part, but I am trying to bring metrics into it as much as I can. I'm a numbers guy. I like seeing those numbers. And so how I decided to do this, okay, and I'm going to get a ton of pushback on this video, I am sure. How I decided to do this is I have all these categories, okay? I picked a bunch of categories that I think make colors good in the Commander format. Certain things that make colors better or make them more valuable as a color you would want to play in the Commander format. That's what we're trying to figure out here. We're trying to figure out what's the best color in the format because it's giving you the options that you need. And of course, in the Commander format, this is particularly important because of the color identity of the deck that you are playing. So I implore you, okay, feel free to comment below categories you think I should have added. I asked my patrons before I made this video. I went on the Discord and I said, hey, here's the categories I'm using. What do you guys think? Think I should add anything in there? Nobody gave me anything that should be added in. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go with this list. If you think I missed a really important category, let me know in the comments below something that I should have included. Other than that, I would like you guys to rate as we go along using my metrics. Again, this is not some definitive proof on what the best color is in the Commander format. There's no way to do that. This is just the way I'm doing it. I'm rating all of the different colors in all these categories based on how good they are in those specific categories. And then of course, I'm going to tally the numbers up at the end. So feel free to rank them along with me as you watch this video, because of course at the end, and just like what I did, is I assigned all those numbers and then I added them up at the end and was kind of surprised by the results, as I'm sure you might be as well. So what are the categories? All right, we're going to start out with tutoring. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, we don't even need tutoring in the Commander format. This is not about what is important in the Commander format, although there are some things on this list that are obviously really important and necessary. For a Commander deck, tutoring is not necessary. It certainly makes the color better, though. We're talking about what makes colors, certain colors, good in the Commander format. And without a doubt, being good at tutoring makes that color better in the Commander format. Without a doubt, tutoring is really important, regardless of what you want to be doing in your Commander deck. Now, the little tricky part here, and I talked about this with, I made a video a while back talking about should we ban tutoring? Because again, a lot of people don't like it, but where do you draw the line? What's a tutor, right? Obviously, there are certain things that are obvious tutors, namely the ones that have tutor in the name. But then there's a lot of stuff that's not, like Expedition Map, for example. I believe I brought up in that video. Is that a tutor? I mean, you could easily make the argument that it is because it is going and getting any land. And nobody goes and gets a basic land with their Expedition Map. Nobody. Every time I've ever seen someone use an Expedition Map, they're going to get a really important land in their deck. Cabal Coffers, for example, right? I've also seen people cast Demonic Tutor to get their Cabal Coffers. So those two cards are doing the same thing, right? So that is what tutoring is. When I think about tutoring in the format, I think of, I'm going to get some really important card that I need in my deck, whether it be a combo piece, just an important creature, an important enchantment, or maybe even an important land that I just really need to be doing whatever I want to be doing. That's the whole purpose of tutoring in the format. So that is what I am talking about when I talk about tutoring here, okay? So let's get to the ranking, right? And this is how it's going to work. The best color, of course, is black. I don't know if there's any dispute here, right? A lot of things here are going to be without dispute. Black's the best color at tutoring. Without a doubt, I don't think I need to even discuss it. It has the unconditional tutors, like, again, Demonic Tutor or Vampiric Tutor. There's lots of them. You go get any card out of your deck, you put it into your hand, It doesn't get any better than that. I don't think. Is there any dispute here? Black's the best at tutoring without a doubt. So the best color at each category gets 5 points. That's how I'm doing this, right? So it's going to be 5 down to 1, of course, because there's 5 colors. I guess I could include colorless here, like Expedition Map would be a colorless option. I had considered it. It's not actually a color, of course. I could have considered it, but I think it really skews up. Like, we want to compare the different colors here, and I think throwing colorless is in here. And obviously, in some of these categories, colorless is better than some of the actual colors, but I think it would skew the stats with directly comparing the colors, so I didn't want to include it here. Number 2 for me is green. Again, I think this is not debatable. I don't know, like the unconditional tutors is almost entirely in black. Now it gets a little more specific, right? Green is going to do 2 things really well. This is why I put green at number 2. It obviously gets creatures better than any other color. That again, is there a dispute there? Obviously not. And in fact, with a Court of Calling type of effect, you put that creature directly into play, which is even better than just a straight up tutor. So it does that without a doubt the best. It also gets lands the best. Again, the Sylvan Scrying or anything like that. As someone who has a Name as One deck where I really badly want my Cabal Coffers in play, and in fact, funny enough, I have 2 decks where I really want an Urborg in play. Both of them are green. I mean, I guess black would be better at it because, again, you could just Demonic Tutor to get your Urborg. But green is very easily just gets that land that you want and puts it directly into play or puts it into your hand so that you can play it. So I think that the fact that green does creatures and lands really, really well, without dispute, it's number 2 here. So it's going to get 4 points. Coming in at number 3 is white. And typically, you know, with a lot of these categories, the first one is going to be probably not a lot of debate. The second one, less debate. You know, as you get farther down the list, that's where the debate is going to occur. I think white is number 3. I will make a case for it. I mean, Enlightened Tutor is a fantastic one. It gets enchantments and artifacts. White also does enchantments other ways. Idyllic Tutor, you got Academy Rector. You know, again, other than the unconditional tutors, it's really the only color that gets enchantments. It can also get artifacts, although I think Enlightened Tutor might be the only one. It can also get creatures, although not a lot. I mean, obviously there's going to be colors here that aren't great at tutoring, but it does have a lot of variety. If I'm playing a white deck, I can get enchantments, I can get artifacts, I can get creatures, I can also get equipment, which white does the best, right? White is the best color at getting equipment. So there's that as well. That's why I put it at number 3, and it, of course, gets 3 points for coming in there. Second from the bottom is blue. I think this is probably where I will get the most pushback. Blue does get instants and sorceries fairly well. Not super well, actually. I think white is better at getting enchantments than blue is at getting instants and sorceries, to be quite honest. By the way, I want to point out here, we have to only include monocolored cards here, right? I can't put Mystical Teachings in here as a card that is a tutor for blue. It's a black card. You can't play it in a mono blue deck. We have to only be talking about monocolored cards here, or else this doesn't work, right? So blue has, of course, Mystical Tutor, which is the best. It also has, I guess it has an unconditional tutor in long-term plans. It's a pretty good tutor. It does also have Transmute, which of course black has as well, which makes black even better than it already is. Transmute's pretty good. I do have Drift of Phantasms actually in a couple of decks. That is a tutor. It's not a great one, but it is an option. It also does artifacts. So, you know, and it does it pretty good. It probably is actually the best color at grabbing artifacts. So this probably would be a big debate between which one, white and blue. Maybe a lot of people might swap them around. Blue does have a pretty decent amount of tutors. For me, white, with the variety of things that it can get, being creatures, enchantments, artifacts, equipment, there's a lot of things you can get in white, whereas blue is a little more limited. I put blue second from the bottom, so of course it gets 2 points. And of course, red, again, I don't think there's a lot of dispute here, is coming in dead last. It only has Gamble. Some people would consider that a great tutor. I don't. I've never put it in a deck. It also has Reckless Handling, right? What's that red one that gets an artifact that just came out last year? You know, what else is there? There's not a lot, right? I guess Goblin Engineer will get an artifact and put it into your graveyard. Like, you're very limited on tutors in red. So I don't think there's a lot of dispute that red's going to come in dead last with only a single point. There's your first category. Moving on to the second category, which is ramp. Again, something without dispute is something that you need in a commander deck. And again, the discussion sort of comes in what actually is ramp. I talked about this in my ramp video. What actually is ramp? What can be included as ramp? Rituals sort of can be included ramp. Treasure tokens is the one that, to me, that's debatable. I am sort of including all of it here, though. Okay. Without a doubt, of course, green's number one here. There is a couple of categories that I'm talking about here where one color is so good at it that it really should get more than 5 points. I would say that's the case with black and tutoring. Black is so much better than every other color at tutoring that it really should get like 6 or 7 points. Green is so much better at ramp than every other color that it should get 6 or 7 points maybe. Again, maybe you guys can tell me in the comments below how I could have fixed this, maybe weighted certain categories differently because they're more important than other categories. This is just, at the end of the day, a fun game to figure out where we're going to get at the end of it. It really doesn't actually matter. It's just the way I went about it. Without a doubt, green is the best color in the format at ramping. Not really much to discuss there. Number 2 is white. And again, this to me is a no-brainer, I think. And I've said this a couple of times where people have really just lost it on me, have really pushed back because they're like, what are you talking about? And even when I first mentioned this on my channel, going on like almost 3 years ago now, I thought white was the second best. And I had guys losing their mind on me about, are you kidding? It's terrible. And white needs better ramp. And of course, we've gotten so much better ramp in the format. A lot of people will mention a few things here, like treasure tokens. Okay, white's got Smothering Tithe too. It's got the best card for that as well, right? So whatever direction you want to go, white's doing that too. As far as putting lands into play, which is the best form of ramp, again, I don't know if anyone would argue that. I mean, we can include mana rocks here, but that's colorless. What color is the best at mana rocks? Colorless, obviously, is, right? So that's not even really in the discussion here. What's in the discussion here is putting lands directly into play, which of course green does best by far, and white does second best by far. Nobody else does it at all. Putting lands directly into play in the commander format is the best way to ramp without question, and white does that second best without question. If we're talking about treasure tokens, white does that pretty good too. In fact, it does it probably second best, I would say. You could even argue it does it first best. So second best in the format. That's where I put it. White gets 4 points. I think that's fair. And then coming in at number 3 is black. Black is, I think, the third best color. And again, there's a lot of gray area here as far as what is ramp and what's not. Again, black does the ritual thing really, really well. Is that actually ramp? You get the one-shot effects a lot. You also have the mana doublers, which of course green's got lots of those, but green's already in number 1. So black has that as well. Black has the ritual effects. It has the mana doublers. It also has Cabal coffers, which again, that's one of the things that people like to point out. Without the Urborg, it is still pretty good. I put it in all my mono black decks because even without the Urborg, it's still giving you a lot of mana. You also have Cabal Stronghold, so you have a couple options there. So there is a lot of different options in black. Like, you don't have the traditional ramping. They're just putting lands into play, but you do have a lot of different options in a lot of different categories. That's why I put black at number 3, and it's going to get 3 points for that. I put red at number 2, or second from the bottom, I guess, getting 2 points. And a lot of people might put red higher simply because of Dockside Extortionist. I mean, guys, it's one card. Not only is it one card in your deck, but it's also entirely reliant on your opponents. I mean, let's be straight here. Ramp is most important early in the game. That's why green is so good at it, because right out of the gate, you can start getting all those lands into play. I don't think this is debatable. Ramp is more important early in the game. Red doesn't do that well at all. What does red do early in the game that ramps well? Dockside Extortionist? How many artifacts and enchantments do your opponents have on turn 2? Often none. I play Dockside Extortionist in one deck, and I have very frequently held it in my hand for a long time, waiting for it to be worth it. Let me know in the comments below. What is worth it for your Dockside Extortionist? For me, it's 4. I have to get at least 4 treasure tokens off of it, or it's not even worth it. Again, and people will talk about the combo potential and stuff. Okay, I'm not talking about combos here. I'm talking about ramp. Which color ramps the best? Does red ramp really well because of just Dockside Extortionist? No. Outside of that, again, treasure tokens I would include in this conversation, but even that, outside of Dockset Extortionist, there's not a lot of great options. You have a couple of good rituals, like a Desperate Ritual. I don't consider that to be a good ritual at all. It's only bumping you by one and only for one turn. That's not great. Mana Geyser's a great one, but that costs 5 mana. You're only going to do it later in a game, so you get that one big play. As far as just traditional ramp, red doesn't do it very well, I don't think. That's why I have it second from the bottom. And I have blue at the bottom. I don't think this is, again, if we're putting lands into play, not a lot of options to do that. Although I just did a blue, really unique ways to ramp in blue. There are a couple of really janky ones that you could do, but they're certainly not great. Doesn't really do the treasure thing very well. Doesn't do rituals great. Although I will say energy tap, I'll throw that out there. I have that in my Abishon deck. But again, that's one that relies heavily on having I usually will cast my Abishon and then tap it and get 6 mana. Ramp isn't nearly as good when I'm doing it on turn 5 or 6 or 7, right? There's not a lot of options for rituals. There's not a lot of options for any of these categories. So I think, again, blue at the bottom makes sense to me. All right, getting to removal, which of course is incredibly important in the Commander format. And again, we have one color that dominates here, white. I don't think there's any dispute here that white comes in best for removal. And, obviously I put white at number 1 when I was doing this, so it's going to get 5 points. But again, this is another situation like with the ramp and the tutoring where I would give white 6 or 7 points because it is far better than any other color at doing this. Far better. As I say all the time, I want to be able to hit any permanent on the battlefield, not just creatures. Okay, there's lots of enchantments, artifacts, lands, planeswalkers that I want to get off the table. And for me to just put one card in my deck that can hit all of those things, that's really nice, right? White does that the best by far. And I had my patrons saying, maybe you should split removal into spot removal and sweepers, so board wipes. And I said, yeah, I could do that, but then we'll just make white even better, right? Because, of course, white's going to be best at both of those categories. I would have given white an unfair advantage by splitting spot, because spot removal, white's the best at that. Board wipes, white's far and away the best at that. Again, even if we're just talking creature board wipes, white's the best at that, but it also gets artifacts, enchantments. It's the only color that has the all non-land permanent board wipes. Who else is doing that, right? So it's going to win both of those categories, so it's going to give white even more of an unfair advantage. So I just kept removal as one category. I don't think there's any dispute here. That's number 1. Number 2 for me is black, and it really got tough after white. I went with black because, again, if we're talking about obviously creature removal, and I've had people tell me black is better than white removal. What? Okay. I mean, I'll make a case for black being number 2. There's no case for it being number 1. For it being number 2, so of course it's going to get 4 points here. You could argue that it is the best at removing creatures. You could. I still wouldn't argue that. I still think white's better at moving creatures, but it is certainly really, really good. If you want to remove creatures, you got options for days, even in a mono black deck. I mean, I'm having trouble finding a room for Infernal Grasp in my mono black decks. That's how good black is at removing creatures. Usually because I want something that fits the theme of what I'm doing. So that we got for days. Planeswalkers as well. They have done the Hero's Downfall thing pretty consistently with black removal now, where they tack on the Planeswalker thing. So Planeswalkers, piece of cake for black to remove those. Then it starts getting tough. Artifacts, there are a couple options. Not a lot, but there are a couple options. If you're really desperate, there are a couple options for black. Enchantments, they've started doing more. Obviously, Feed the Swarm is an auto-include if you're playing a mono black deck. There are some other ones that will exile an enchantment, not necessarily targeting. They're not great, but there are some options, right? Again, just having those options is important, and there is actually even options for removing lands. Not that you really need to, but there are options there, okay? That's why I put black at number 2. Green came in at number 3. And again, as we get down the list, this is where people will really start to push back, I'm sure. But again, for me, people are just so focused on removing creatures, I think because of your commander, right? And people will make the argument, and I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to Swords to Plowshares video where I talk about removal, a whole lot of topics covered all in one. One of the arguments I heard about Swords to Plowshares is you're always going to have a target for it because your opponent has a commander. Who has ever played a commander game where there is not a target for an artifact removal or enchantment removal? Has that ever happened? That never happens. So that's a silly argument. And in fact, land removal as well, right? If you put Let's bring up Acidic Slime. There's a great card that, it has got pushed out. It doesn't see much play anymore. It destroys an artifact and an enchantment, and it also can hit lands if you really need to. And how often are you in a game where there is a land that you have to get off the table? It happens to me all the time. I don't know about you guys. I mean, I don't see Gaia's Cradle a lot. I see Coffers a lot. I see Maze of Ith a lot. I see Glacial Chasm actually a lot because I have some patrons that like to play that card. Those are lands that you absolutely have to get off the table. And green's actually pretty good at that. Green does the non-creature permanent thing really, really well. So any permanent outside of creatures, green does really, really well. And in fact, has, in my opinion, some of the best removal in the entire game, like Bane of Progress. That's a card that's just an auto include for me in a green deck and is often a absolute blowout. So it's got some of the best. Now, as far as creatures go, it's not great. Again, Beast Within, I would argue, is the best removal spell in the entire format, which of course is green, and it does have the fight effect, so it can deal with creatures, right? It's not the best way ever, but it does have the option for dealing with creatures. That's why I put green in the middle with 3 points, because it deals with non-creature permanents really, really well, and has the ability to deal with creatures, even if it doesn't do it super well. Blue I put at number 4, second from the bottom. It's going to get 2 points here. I would say blue is actually a really good color at dealing with creatures. It actually does do it pretty darn well. And in fact, if I'm making like a Dimir deck, I might even put Rapid Hybridization in there. That's a really good creature removal spell. I also really like Curse of the Swine. It's one of my favorite removal spells in the format, even if I'm adding other colors to a deck. Like if I'm playing a Simic deck, Curse of the Swine's going in there. If I'm playing a Dimir deck, I might even put Curse of the Swine in there. It exiles. It is sort of a board wipe, but also targets. I love it. However, once we get out of creatures, now it gets real tough. There are a couple of options for removing artifacts. Of course, Raven Form being, again, if I'm playing a mono blue deck, that's an auto include for me, and Resculpt. That's about it, right? So that's not great. It's okay. Having 2 options in your mono blue deck for dealing with artifacts is okay. Are you going to get it? I mean, I guess you could tutor for it if you really needed to. Enchantments is the big one for me, and this is why I put blue second from the bottom. Is for me, enchantments are becoming the number one thing I want to get off the table, even more than my opponent's commander. As I say all the time, they're either really, really powerful and are taking over the game, or they're ruining the game for you, right? All those lockdown effects, the strangleholds, the rest in pieces, all that, they're all enchantments, right? I mean, yeah, artifacts sometimes too, but mostly I would say enchantments. I am never, ever, ever going to be sad about having enchant removal in my hand. Not ever. And blue can't do it at all. It's one of the things that I dislike the most about my mono blue deck. I will say though, people will point out the fact that blue can bounce things, and Cyclonic Rift is, that card alone is going to bump blue up way up the list for a lot of people. Listen, guys, it's a temporary solution. That's it. It's just a temporary solution. I would include it as removal. Absolutely. In fact, it's probably the best blue removal spell. You can use it just to target one thing if you absolutely have to. But for me, bounce as removal is just like treasure tokens as ramp. It's second rate. Okay, it's not the best option. The best option for removal is I exile your permanent and you never see it again. That's the best option. Again, is that debatable? I don't think it is. Just like putting a basic land directly into play that is going to sit there for the entirety of the game and I get to use it every single turn is the best option for ramping. So is I exile your permanent or destroy your permanent is also good. I bounce your creature so you just play it again the next turn is, I barely would call that removal. That is like save my life type of situation, which again, for me, Cyclonic Rift was used as, Crater Hoof Behemoth attack. I Cyclonic Rift to save my life. And yes, it sets my opponent back quite a bit, but it's mostly just saving my life. I don't know. Would people put blue ahead of green? As far as removal goes, maybe. Anyway, moving on. That's where I stuck blue. Red comes in at last. This is a little debatable. Red does have a couple of great removal options, Chaos Warp being one of the most popular in the entire format. That's what you want. It hits anything. Great. But what else do you got? Wild Magic Surge is probably the second best removal option. Where do you go from there, right? It does deal with artifacts really well. I guess it depends on what you think is most important to get rid of. And I know people will say, oh, well, red deals with creatures really well too. Nah, I don't know about that. If we're just talking about creatures, White's the best, black's number 2, blue's number 3, red's number 4 as far as just removing creatures. Blasphemous Act will usually hit everything, but not always, right? Red doesn't actually have a board wipe that guarantees kills every creature. I've cast a Blasphemous Act or seen it cast on several occasions where there was a creature that had a bigger than a 13 toughness and it stuck around. I think I just had a game on my channel where there was a Forgotten Ancient that was way bigger than a 13 toughness and Blasphemous Act wasn't good enough, right? Chain Reaction, again, not good enough. Usually it'll get everything, but a lot of times it won't. That's your creature removal board wipe, guys. They're not great, to be honest. If I'm going to board wipe, I want to hit everything. Red doesn't have any board wipes that do that. It also doesn't have any removal for I just straight up kill a creature. Again, for all the guys out there that think red is great at creature removal, name me some. Aftershock? That's one that comes to mind that actually destroys a creature, just straight up destroys a creature. If my opponent has an Elish Norn on the table, okay, and I'm not talking about Chaos Warp or Wild Magic Sword, I'm just talking about creature removal. Removal you put in your deck for removing creatures. What is red going to do to get that Elish Norn off the table? Blasphemous Act, maybe Chain Reaction. Again, now we're talking board wipes. What about targeted removal? There's not a lot of options there, at least not any you're going to put in your actual... Like, how many of those do you regularly play in a commander deck? There's not a lot. Red's not great at removal, guys. And of course, then there's the enchantments. The enchantments, can't deal with them at all. Again, outside of the Chaos Warp, Wild Magic Surge situation. Red's at the bottom for me here, without a doubt. Next category for me is protection. And yes, this is something that I have said before every commander deck needs. To me, this is the inverse of removal. So if you think removal is important in the commander format, which of course you should, protection is the inverse of that. I can't count how many games I've seen completely change because someone cast a Heroic Intervention or a Teferi's Protection. And all their stuff, I mean, it's like the inverse of a Cyclonic Rift. Again, that's a perfect example. If you think someone casting a Cyclonic Rift just ends the game, okay, but the guy who casted Teferi's Protection, same thing. He gets to keep all his stuff and nobody else does. It's incredibly important. And it very frequently changes the outcome of the game. So I thought I would include it here. What's the best color at protection? Again, it's white. Is that in debate? I don't think it is. Without a doubt. Teferi's Protection is... without question, I think the best protection spell in the entire format. Phasing out is the best way to protect your stuff. It protects against almost anything. And then on top of that, you have the protection from everything and all that as well. There is Galadriel's Dismissal, which can phase out all your creatures. Again, phasing being the best option. Clever Concealment's a great one that phases out non-land permanents, I believe. Everybody Lives is a great one that just came out in Doctor Who. Like, there's so many options. White is by far the best here. I don't think that's within dispute. Again, even if I just want to protect one thing, I got Blacksmith Skill. I think also, without dispute, number 2 is green, although, I don't know. Maybe you could dispute it. And I know there's going to be some people, and I'll do a little bit of a spoiler here. There's going to be some people screaming at the screen right now about counterspells protecting your stuff. And people might also include that in the removal. And why do I have blue so low on removal? It's got counterspells. I made it its own category, all right? It is the next category so that you guys can save your breath there, your comments. Okay, yes, counterspells could have been included in protection and it also could have been included in removal, but I made it its own category, so it is not being included in either of those categories. So again, that goes into the ranking here. Green is number 2, getting 4 points. Again, Heroic Intervention would be the second best card in the format, I would imagine, at protecting your stuff, just making all your permanents hexproof and indestructible. I have won games because of that card. Plenty of times I've won games because of that card. It's an absolute must for me in a commander deck. Bane of Progress would be an absolute must for me. On the other end of the spectrum, Heroic Intervention is a must for me because it will save against that Bane of Progress or that, whatever that board wipe is, most board wipes. Again, Teferi's Protection is going to protect against all board wipes. It's going to protect against Cyclonic Rift, farewell. Heroic Intervention won't, but it will protect against the majority of them. You got Tameo Safekeeping. You have a lot of the single ones. You do have a lot of the I protect my creature. That is pretty common. There could be some debate here for sure. You do have some ones where you can like regenerate your team, stuff like that. This is definitely one that you could debate a little. Again, this is for me another category where white is so much better at it than everyone else that you could give it 6 or 7 points. There's a huge gap here between white and everything else. Green, I think, is number 2. Coming in at number 3 with 3 points is blue, and blue does the phasing thing really well. And again, phasing is the best way to protect your stuff. Blue does have a fair amount of that. So could blue be better than green here? Maybe. It's debatable for sure. This is how I ranked it. Blue gets 3 points. And red is coming in at number 2, or second from the bottom, I guess, with 2 points for one very specific reason. And a lot of people would be shocked to see red not at the bottom, but I put red at number 2 for, and again, there's probably people out there thinking red should even be higher because of the redirect spells. Might be able to include that in counterspells. Again, it's gray area, right? It's not really a counterspell. To me, it's more protection because that's literally what it's doing. It almost 99% of the time being used that way. Deflecting SWAT, man, it really is one of the most powerful spells in the entire format. And so for that reason alone, I have to bring up certain cards. Like a deflecting SWAT is so good in the commander format. A free redirect for any spell or ability is absurdly powerful. It's getting included here. That's why red is not at the bottom. Not just because of deflecting SWAT. There are other options. I think the game might even be on my channel where my one opponent was playing a Throwmock deck. Of course, he did the fling thing as they always do. And Buddy had a Bolt Bend, right? Very common redirect spell in the format. Completely changed the outcome of the game. Completely change the outcome of the game. That's why I'm including protection here in this as a really important category, because it really can change the outcome of the game very often. And red does that fairly well. Not super well, but again, deflecting SWAT we see a lot. Bolt Bend we see a lot. There are a couple other options. Like Wild Ricochet used to get played in the format a lot. I don't see it much anymore. Red does do that. It's not the best way to protect your stuff, but it is a pretty good way. And often you can get a 2-for-1 situation. So for that reason, maybe people might put red higher. I don't know. Last is black for me here. Again, I don't think a lot of people would dispute this. Black does have a couple of things that make your creatures indestructible. And in fact, funny enough, there's actually a card. The name escapes me right now, but it's a card that makes a permanent indestructible. There are a couple options out there for all you mono black players. If you're looking for that, it does the slingshot thing pretty well, right? The supernatural stamina, those kinds of cards. It does that actually a lot. They've been printing a new one of those with every set now. So it does that a lot. And that's pretty good. It's not the greatest way ever to protect your stuff. Basically, any graveyard hate, like a Rest in Peace in play, will just shut all those off. So now they're not usable. So again, there's a lot of gray area here. But as far as just protecting your stuff, I think black's probably at the bottom. All right, as I alluded to, the next category is counterspells. And again, this is another category where one color dominates far and away above everyone else, which of course is blue. And I included this category, again, for a couple of reasons. I included it because a lot of people would be like, okay, well, blue's better at protecting stuff because of counterspells. And blue's better at removal because of counterspells. But counterspells are not really protecting your stuff. They can, but not always. Like if someone casts a Wrath of God and you counterspell that, okay, that's protecting your stuff, but it's also protecting everyone else's stuff. Whereas a Heroic Intervention only saves my stuff. That's way better protection, right? In my opinion. So that's why I wanted to make it my own category. And I also wanted to make it my own category because it's obviously really good. And of course, blue being number 1 here is, again, this is another situation where you could give blue 6 or 7 points because it's so much better than every other color at this. And it is just such a powerful thing to do. You don't need to do this in your commander deck, right? This is just like tutoring where you could get away with not doing it. If you had a blue deck and you didn't have counterspells, you could be okay. You kind of be silly not to, right? Because blue it does it so well, and it is such a powerful effect to have, right? Again, it's just like making a black deck and not putting any tutors in there. It's like, well, you're really missing out because that's a really powerful thing to do in the commander format, and that color does it so well. You'd be silly not to. I mean, you don't have to, but it's really, really good. And I did not originally have counterspells on my list. And I just thought, you know what? A lot of people like playing blue in the commander format specifically just for counterspells and nothing else. And I mean, you guys will see where the ranking here is at the bottom. I'm making the argument now that people overrate blue in the format greatly simply because of counterspells. Can be really, really good. It can be. Someone cast a Rise of the Dark Realms or an Insurrection or a Tooth and Nail or one of those really powerful game-ending spells, and for 1 blue mana, that you just completely reverse it. That's great, right? But what if you don't have the 1 blue mana open? What if they have a Grand Abolisher in play? What if, it's uncounterable for whatever reason? What if? Yes, counterspells are really, really powerful in the format without a doubt. They do answer a lot of things. Not everything. They do answer a lot of things though. So I did include them in this list for this reason. And of course, blue's number one by far. Number two is white. I don't think this is disputable. I mean, maybe, again, that's why I'm doing this. You guys can let me know what you think. If we're just talking about who's got the counterspells, white's got the most, right? Outside of blue, the color that has the most actual counterspells, although they're not great. Again, a Mana Tithe is not a great counterspell. It is a counterspell though, right? An Illumination, not a great counterspell, but it is a counterspell. Lapse of Certainty is a card that, man, I'm putting it in more and more decks. That is a game saver a lot of times. Yeah, you're just putting it back on top of your opponent's library, but it is a hard counterspell. And I've seen it save the game a couple of times. And again, you can get into the situation where I'm casting a farewell, I'm going to exile all my opponent's stuff. My other opponent responds by phasing out all his stuff, and I respond with a Lapse of Certainty, and I put that Teferi's Protection back on top of their library. Sure, they get it back the next turn, but doesn't matter. All their stuff is exiled. Can't undo that, right? I really have become a big fan of that card. Just the counter something for one turn actually can be a real blowout sometimes. And white has a few other options as well. No one else does this great, obviously. White, I think, is second best at it. I put red as number 3 here. I think probably there might be some people that would argue that red is better than white. Where's the hard counterspell? Tibalt's Trickery, I think, would be the only one. It's okay. I've never put it in a deck. I don't love the idea of possibly giving, honestly, I've seen people get something better off Tibalt's Trickery than what is being countered. That's the tough thing about counterspells, right? Again, when do you pull the trigger? Removal typically is not used great in the commander format. Counterspells are by far the thing that is used the worst. Horrible decision-making when it comes to counterspells from what I've seen. It happens so frequently. People like counterspells. It makes them feel good to have that answer in their hand that they think is an answer to everything, but it's not actually. Counterspells are actually difficult to use properly. Tibalt's Trickery is definitely a counterspell I've seen used poorly a lot. It is a pretty good counterspell. Where do you go from there? Again, red has some fringe ones. Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast are probably the big ones. They only hit blue stuff though, guys. That's very specific. I know blue is a really popular color in the format. And a lot of people, if you're in a play group where your opponents just like lots of counterspells, they're never going to be dead cards. But I've played lots of games where a Pyroblast can be a dead card in my hand, so I don't put them in any of my decks. In my opinion, even though Pyroblast is played way more than a Mana Tithe in Commander, and probably to more effect, I would say it's more fringe. It only deals with one color and nothing else, whereas Mana Tithe deals with any color. You do have a couple other really funny fringe ones, like Mage's Contest is a really funny fringe one that I actually had a patron cast in a game recently. I don't know. I put it in the middle. I think that's fair. Coming in at number 2 is green. There actually is a couple here. Again, we get to the bottom here and it's like, okay, do we even include these? Green has a couple. Avoid Fate is one that actually is not bad. But again, we're talking about a very specific thing here that one color does way better than everyone else. I put green at 2 and I put black at 1. As far as I know, Dash Hopes is the only actual black counterspell, which is almost useless in the commander format because, of course, you will just have someone pay the 5 life. No one's going to forgo that, right? It's not great. What other options do we have? I don't think there is any. There also is Imp's Mischief. I'm sure a lot of people will bring that up. It's not a counter. I guess it's in the protection category because it's a redirect. So again, you could include it either or. Either way, I think black's at the bottom here. I don't think that's disputable. All right, getting to my last category. We have 6 categories here, and the last one, I say card draw for last because this was by far the most difficult. I talked with my patrons on the Discord. I tried to get some feedback here. I'm trying not to be biased, so I'm trying to get feedback as much as I can. I thought I knew. When I started filling out these other ones, it was pretty easy, most of these. When I got to card draw, I'm like, I'm going to save this to last. I'll do the other ones first, and I'll save card draw for last because, man, it was so difficult. And they're obviously incredibly important in the format, without a doubt. I don't think there's any dispute there, but how do you decide what is good at card draw and what isn't? And a lot of people, as soon as I say card draw, people automatically, oh, it's this color, it's this, right? They're just going to line up what colors they think. Again, certain colors just come to mind. However, I will caution people here. A lot of colors, there's two things in particular that has to go into consideration here when you're talking about this. The first thing is certain cards are just incredibly good at drawing cards in the Commander format, right? Like I'll bring up Necropotence. Let's start with that. Necropotence, you could argue, and I think I would argue that it's the best for just, I straight up just draw as many cards as I want. Like if I just have a permanent on the battlefield, and as I do argue, having a permanent on the battlefield that can repeatedly draw you cards is the best option rather than just a one shot that draws you a couple cards. Necropotence is probably the best at that in the entire game of Magic. I don't know if there's anything better. I just draw tons of cards. However, that's one card. Again, this is just like the Cyclonic Rift situation or the Dockside Extortionist situation. That's one card, guys. It's one card in your deck. We can't say that a certain color is the best at card drawing because of one card, because there's this one super busted card, right? You could say the same about blue and Rhystic Study, right? A lot of people will bring up that. Okay, that's one card. So I have to look at the high end. What's the ceiling? What's the middle? What's the bottom here, right? You have to look at all of it. The other thing you have to look at is a lot of people will say, well, this card draw is reliant on certain things, like Rhystic Study, for example. Rhystic Study is actually entirely reliant on your opponents, guys. And if you look at, if I look at the top 3 blue card draw options, Rhystic Study relies on your opponents. Mystic Remora is probably number 2, relies on your opponents. You know, less so, but still relies on your opponents. Consecrated Sphinx, which a lot of people will bring up, actually relies on your opponents. So all the 3, I would argue the 3 best blue card draw options all rely on your opponents. Just saying. I mean, I have to take into consideration, though, the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is all 3 of those draw cards really well. They do, even though they are reliant on your opponents. So there's 2 things to talk about here. The first thing is, what's the yes, you do have some really, really powerful options. The Rhystic Studies and the Necropotence and the stuff like that. But where do you go after that? Is there a big drop off? And I think for some colors there is. The other thing is, what are we relying on, right? Are we relying on certain things to happen in order for this color to draw cards well? And usually that's always the case, right? So I'm going to start out with black. Black is number 1 for me, barely. It's really tight, guys, okay? This is a category where nobody is far and away the best, in my opinion. It's really tight in here. I put black at number 1 because, again, black does have those really powerful, it does have a really high ceiling, really powerful options. It also does have a lot of really great ones in the middle, like Morbid Opportunist, as I talked about in my overrated cards video, one of my favorite card draw options in the entire format now. It's great. Even if I'm not doing a Death Triggers deck, it's still going to draw cards well. Every color, a lot of people will say, oh, white relies on too many things. Every color does, guys. Every color relies on something. There are a few spells that are just draw X cards, but for the most part, every color is relying on certain things. Black is relying on life, okay? I have seen a Necropotence in play not drawing cards because my opponent only had a couple of life and they couldn't pay it. All black card draw options, not all, but most, are either relying on your life or they are relying on creatures dying. However, you do have a lot of life in the Commander format. Life is a resource, as they say all the time. And also, creatures are dying all over the place. Again, even if you don't build around that, if I just throw a Dark Prophecy in play, I'm still going to draw cards. If I throw Harvester of Souls, there's another one that's been used as a card draw option forever, because even if you're not doing that, it's still going to draw you cards. Black draws cards really, really well, both in the, just generically good card draw, but also if I'm being more specific with what it's doing. Blue comes in at number 2 for me. Blue is the second best at drawing cards, so it's going to get 4 points here. And again, we have the really high-end Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, Consecrated Sphinx, the really good draw options, but we got some other pretty good ones as well. I would say that blue is a little overrated, but blue has a lot of the generic good card draw things, which are good, but once you get synergistic with your deck, a lot of these other colors can do it so much better. Really, those generically good card draw options bump blue up high on this list for me, because after you get past those first 3, it really trails off. Like a Blue Sun Zenith, I don't consider that to be a good card draw option. It's not, unless you have a lot of mana, right? I mean, it can be really good, but it also can be really, really bad. As I've stated before, Brainstorm, cards like that people consider to be good card draw. I almost don't even consider Brainstorm to be card draw at all. It's a cantrip. It replaces itself and nothing more. So I think there's a lot of cards like that people in their heads will think, oh, well, of course blue's great at it. And the Commander format, a card like Brainstorm or Ponder, those that are considered to be good options in other formats, I don't consider them to be good in Commander. Rhystic Study is good, no question. Mystic Remora is fantastic. Consecrated Sphinx is fantastic, although 6 mana is a lot. After that, it trails off a bit. So blue for me barely comes in at number 2. Barely. It is really, really close. And I could almost switch them around with green, which comes in at number 3. And green, green falls into a couple of categories. You could make the argument that green, and for a lot of people who say that white's card draw is reliant on other things, green, no color is more reliant on things than green. All of their card draw is reliant on either having lots of creatures in play or having really big creatures in play. Rishkar's Expertise isn't very good if the only creature you have in play is a 2-power. That's a terrible card draw option there, right? They have lots of those, though. If you are doing so, if things are working out well for you, if you have your creatures in play, if you have a good board, if you have your commander out or big creatures or whatever, things get really good really fast. You have so many great options there. If I have lots of creatures I can put into play, Guardian Project gets fantastic. The Great Henge gets one of the best in the format for drawing cards. If things are going my way, if I have a big creature in play, Return of the Wild Speaker's phenomenal. Hunter's Insight, draw a ton of cards all at once. Hunter's Insight can be 3 mana. I draw like 10 cards. That's amazing. There's not a lot of cards in the format that'll do that. So green does have that really, really, really good potential, but also is reliant on, okay, my opponent just cast a removal spell on my creature before it did combat damage. Now I draw 0 cards off my Hunter's Insight, right? There is that as well. Reliant on a lot, but is also really, really good. So I like where I put green here. Put it white second from the bottom. Again, for me, it's close. I've talked about in the past, my favorite, if we're not talking about color at all, 2 of my favorite card draw options in the entire format, Archivist of Ogma, which I'm going to have a hard time not putting in any deck that has white, and Esper Sentinel. Those are both great options for drawing cards. Really great options. On top of the fact that they can fit in other themes as well. I mean, Esper Sentinel is a human soldier, guys. Like, talk about themes that it can very easily fit into. Also, an artifact creature fits in that theme as well. So white does have some really good generic card draw options. It also has the options that fit the specific theme. So it has the Welcoming Vampire. It has the Takassi's Welcome. Now, that doesn't fit every theme, but it fits a lot. If I'm putting a white-green deck together, I have 2 white-green decks. I have Archivist of Ogma in one of my decks. I have Takassi's Welcome in another one of my white-green decks. So I'm going to shoehorn some of the white stuff in there. I actually think I could put white way higher on this list, in my opinion. Putting it second from the bottom feels really bad because there is so many fantastic white card draw options in the format now. The big swings of I fill my hand with a ton of cards, white doesn't really have any of those. It has more the incidental, oh, my opponent searched their library, I get a draw. Or I had a creature enter the battlefield to get a draw. It has more of those. It has lots of those. So I think keeping your hand full regularly in white is actually not that difficult at all, but it doesn't have the real big swings like black, blue, and green do. So that's why only 2 points here, but man, it's close. It's tight. Coming in dead last is red. Again, I don't know if people would dispute this. It doesn't draw cards at all. If we're just talking about card draw, I mean, people will point out impulse draw. I think impulse draw is super overrated. If you're impulse drawing 3 cards per turn, let's just say, how many of those are you actually using? I see it happen all the time. You're always leaving cards in exile. And I don't like impulse draw for a number of reasons. I have Bergie in my Browlin deck for the backside, the horn, which it's a discard outlet. And it's also, it is card advantage because I discard 1 card to impulse draw 2. And man, I very frequently am like, oh, I'll impulse draw 2 cards and I'll be like, oh, that's not very good. And it's even extra not good. I'm thinking of taking it out of the deck. It's even extra not good because I can't discard cards from exile. I can only discard them from my hand. So that's a case where I really want them in my hand so that I can keep discarding. And I can't do that with impulse draw, right? There's 2 things people will point out why they think red's actually not bad at card draw. The first thing is impulse draw, which I don't think is technically is not card draw at all, but it certainly is not great card draw. The other thing they'll bring up is Wheel of Fortune, which is, again, 1 card. I know there are some other wheel options. not great ones. The red does have the I discard my hand or shuffle away my hand and then draw that many cards, which again, that's not really card draw either. What if you only have one card in hand? I have one card in hand and I have to draw cards and then I get that? That doesn't seem great, right? It's not great. It's terrible. I've been in that situation as well. The situation where my hand's empty and I just need to refill it, the only thing that does that is Wheel of Fortune, which also refills my opponent's hand. That doesn't feel good either. So, and I know people love Wheel of Fortune as a card draw option for red. I think it's a terrible one. It is. My opponents get to refill their hands. I can't count how many times I've had a guy, and I always leave mana open. So I have a guy cast a Wheel of Fortune. Okay, I'm like, okay, well, I got 3 cards in hand, and 2 of them are removal spells. So I'll respond by removing 2 things and then wheel away 1 card and draw a fresh hand. I just think it's not great as a card draw option. Without a doubt, red is at the bottom for me here. I don't even think it's close. So that is it. That is the 6 categories. And well, what do you do now? Now you add up the numbers, right? And this is why I put 5 as the top. The top number gets 5 and the bottom number gets 1, because of course now I'm going to just add them all up and see who has the biggest number at the end of the day, right? So if you've gotten 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 or something, you add all those numbers up and what's your final score? Coming in dead last, and it should be a surprise to no one, is red. Red was dead last in 3 categories. Tutoring, again, without dispute in my opinion. Removal, which that maybe could get some dispute, and card draws without dispute. It's really bad at, for sure, tutoring and card draw, and it's not very good at a lot of, it's not great at ramp, it's not great at protecting its stuff. What is red good at? All right. If someone who didn't play Magic asked me what's red great at, I would say it's great at direct damage. That is the one thing that red does by far the best, but that's not great in the Commander format, right? Again, that's why red is fantastic in Modern and other formats. Doing a lava spike to your opponent's face in other formats is great. I don't know if anyone's ever done that. Has anyone ever cast a lava spike in a Commander game? I don't know. That's a terrible card in a Commander game, because doing that in Commander, direct damage in the Commander format, it's not great. I will say though, they have had a few Commanders where they're trying to make that strategy better. And going direct damage to creatures is also not great, because what if the creature's really big? Now you don't have enough damage to kill it, right? This is a no-brainer. If before I started ranking anything, I'm like, well, red's going to be last without a doubt. And a lot of people probably would agree with me. I know there's guys out there that like playing red. That's fine. You don't have to get upset at me. This is just the metrics that I used. And how can you dispute it? I guess you could maybe say red is better at removal by a little bit. And you could say that red is better at ramp, maybe. But you're only adding a couple points. Red is by far the worst color in the Commander format, in my opinion, because blue comes in at number 4 for me. And again, I shouldn't say for me. Using the metrics that I used, I didn't know blue was going to come in second from the bottom. I just added up all the numbers. Once I was done, blue got 17 points. So again, if you look at red, even if you bumped red up a couple categories, a couple numbers in each category, it's still going to be way below blue. Like red is far and away, using these metrics, at the bottom. Blue, second from the bottom. Again, let's look at what blue does well. I added the category of counterspells. Without that category, blue is, of course, not nearly as good. So I specifically added that category just to make blue a little bit better in this ranking. Blue's number 2 in card draw. I think that's fair. Number 3, it's in the middle for protection. I think that's fair as well. Removal, again, maybe. Again, if people are bumping up red and blue for removal, what's coming in last? Green, I guess? I mean, I guess you could make the argument that green is the worst at removal. I don't think it is, though. It certainly isn't very good at ramping. Again, maybe people would probably put it second or third at tutoring. No, second is silly. Third at tutoring. So if I put it third at tutoring, it gets 1 extra point. And if I put it third at removal, it gets 1 extra point. So now it's at 19. Spoiler alert, it's still second from the bottom. So second worst color in the format. I know it seems silly, but again, I will point out that I think a lot of people overrate blue in the format because of a couple of really powerful cards like Rhystic Study and Cyclonic Rift, and because of counterspells. That's it. Pretty much everyone loves playing blue in the Commander format because of Rhystic Study, Cyclonic Rift, and Counterspells. That's the 3 main reasons people play that color. It is good at other things, but it's not super great at anything other than Counterspells. This is where things get really shocking. Again, guys, I just added up the numbers and this is what I got. Black is coming in next. And black is, I'll just say black is probably the most popular color in the format. I think if I had to pick one, I would say that was it. It is the best at tutoring without a doubt. And again, just like with the Counterspells, I think people put They overweight tutoring, where they think tutoring is so good that they bump. And you could put more, you could weight the counterspells category heavier if you think it's that good. And you could weight the tutoring category heavier if you think it really is that good, because black does do that the best by far. But what else does it do the best? I said card draw, and a lot of people probably would not even say that. A lot of people might say that blue or green are better at card draw. I said it's the best at card draw. So it is the best at 2 categories, according to me, and it's the second best at removal. Still coming in third. Barely, though, because at number 2 is green. Yes, that's right. Green came in at number 2 with 21 points, and a lot of people probably would have guessed it would come in at number 1. It is the best at ramp, and that is all. Again, it's only best at one thing. What else would you include, right? When I talk about these categories, what other categories are you going to include, right? The category that is going to bump blue up higher where it should be. The category that's going to bump black up higher. I already included tutoring, which it's the best at. I included what blue is the best at, which is counterspells. I included what green is the best at in ramp. And it's also pretty good at all these other things. Came out at 21. So of course, my best color here was white at 23 points. And again, let's talk about the things that are without dispute here. Okay, without a doubt, white is the best at removal. Again, I would give it 6 or 7 points in that category. Even if you separated them into board wipes and spot removal, it's still by far the best. It is the best at protection without dispute, I think. So it is the best in 2 different categories, 2 really, really, really important categories, in my opinion. It is pretty good at counterspells. It is. In my opinion, I rated it too low at card draw. It's second from the bottom at card draw. I actually think it's pretty good at card draw. I don't have any problem drawing cards in either of my mono white decks. It's also pretty darn good at ramp. I don't have any problem with that in any of my mono white decks as well. And it's pretty good at tutoring. If I want to get certain cards, whether they be creatures, enchantments, or whatever, it's pretty good at that too. And there's also a lot of other things like stacks and hate bears and that kind of stuff that white is also by far the best at. By far. If you want to lock down what your opponents are doing, graveyard deck, rest in peace. Piece of cake, right? My opponent's playing an ETB deck, no problem. Got that covered, right? Pretty much any scenario that my opponent is playing a deck and I want to hate on what they're doing, I got tons of options there. I can even blow up all the lands if I want to in white. White really is one of the most versatile, and versatility was going to be a category that I included here. I think white is the most versatile color in the entire format, and it does almost nothing badly. What does it do badly? All these colors do certain things badly. What does white do badly? It even has counterspells. So yeah, it came in at number 1 for me. Again, is it the best color in the format? I don't know, maybe not, but I'll just say this. If I'm playing a mono white deck, I don't have any problem. Anything I want to do, I can pretty much do it in a mono white deck. And that's, for the most part, what I'm talking about here, because, of course, we're in the Commander format where color identity matters so much because it will limit you to the colors that you can play. And I would imagine if someone's even playing a 5-color deck, think about it, guys. If you're playing a 5-color deck and you want to put removal in there, you're probably putting white removal. Even if it's white combined with another color, you're putting white to protect your stuff. You're putting white for maybe even card draw. You might even be putting in white as a ramp option. Like Deep Gnome Terramancer is a card that I would put in a 5-color deck because it's a great option there as well. You might even put in a white tutor because Enlightened Tutor is one of the best tutors in the entire format, right? So I know I'm going to get lots of pushback. That is fine. This is just how I did it. Again, I used specific categories, specific metrics, add up those numbers all at the end. You guys let me know what you got. Maybe you could do it in the comments below using my metric. Again, if there's some category here that you think I should have included, you can let me know. If you would have ranked them differently amongst the metrics that I used, you can let me know there as well. Let me know what you guys got out as far as the numbers go. Just an interesting sort of thought experiment or math experiment that I thought I would do. What's actually the best color in the Commander format? It's completely up for debate. Again, this is all subjective. I tried to make this video as objective as possible, and this is what I came up with. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.